Before Roy Clark died, he talked about one of the saddest nights in country music. It was when his friend David Stringbean Ackman was killed. For years, fans wanted to know what really happened and why this story still makes people in Nashville so upset. Let's look back at what Roy Clark told us. David Ackman was born on June 17, 1915 in Jackson County, Kentucky. Everyone called him Stringbean later on. He grew up in the hills where life was really hard. Jackson County was a place where most families had farms and worked with their hands. Life was plain, but it was also full of tough times. Families had to be really careful with money, and staying alive was more important than being comfortable. David was one of many kids in the Ackman family. His parents worked really hard to put food on the table, and from when he was little, he learned that every person in the family had to help out. There wasn't much money for fun stuff or nice things. If something broke, they had to fix it instead of buying a new one. If the family wanted to have fun, they made their own music, told stories, or got together with neighbors. This simple way of living taught him to respect hard work and to enjoy the small happy moments that came from family and friends. When David was a boy, he really wanted his own banjo, but his family didn't have enough money. Buying a musical instrument just wasn't something they could do, but he wasn't the type of kid to give up easily. He found what he could, an old shoebox, a stick, and some strings, and made his own banjo-like thing. It didn't look good, but it let him practice and start learning the sounds that he loved so much. That homemade banjo was his first step into music. Later on, his hard work paid off. When he was still young, David made a trade that showed how much he loved music and how country families sometimes had to give up important things. He gave away 2 chickens to get a real banjo. To him, the trade was totally worth it. That instrument became his best friend, and he almost never put it down. From that day on, he practiced all the time, teaching himself songs and beats until the banjo felt like part of his body. But before music could take him away from farm life completely, David had to live through some of the hardest years in America's history. The Great Depression happened when he was still a young man. All across the country, banks closed, people lost their jobs, and families who were already struggling had even less money to live on. For people like the Ackmans, the Depression wasn't just something they heard about on the news. It meant empty kitchen cabinets, long days of work with very little pay, and watching neighbors lose farms they had worked their whole lives to keep. To help support himself and his family, David joined something called the Civilian Conservation Corps. This was a program the government made to give young men jobs during the Depression. His work with this group took him outside, where he helped build roads, plant trees, and make public land better. And soon, the world would see how this tall, skinny kid from Kentucky turned those early lessons into a job that made people laugh, sing, and remember him for many, many years. But as his story got happier, dark things started happening around him too. Especially one thing he could never stop worrying about: his fear of losing money. By the time David Ackman was in his late teens and early 20s, music wasn't just something he did for fun anymore. It was becoming his way to make a living. He already had a good reputation in his Kentucky town for being both a really good banjo player and someone who could make people laugh. Whenever there was a local contest or a get-together, he was there with his banjo. He could win people over, not only by playing music, but also by being funny. He was good at saying something funny or playful between songs, and that mix of music and comedy made him different from everyone else. It was during one of these contests that David caught the attention of an old-time musician named Asa Martin. Martin was a well-known performer in Kentucky, and he often asked younger musicians to join him on stage. He was impressed by this tall, skinny young man who played the banjo with so much heart, while also making the audience laugh. Martin asked David to join his group, giving him the chance to perform for more people than just his local town. But David didn't have the stage name that people would know him by yet. One night when Asa Martin was introducing him on stage, he forgot David's last name. Looking at how tall and thin David was, Martin quickly filled in the blank by calling him Stringbeans. The crowd liked it, and the name stuck. Over time, it got shortened to Stringbean, and that became David's permanent name in the music world. From then on, the name fit him just as well as his banjo did. With a stage name and more experience, Stringbean's career started moving forward. His big break came in the early 1940s when he joined Bill Monroe's band, the Bluegrass Boys. Bill Monroe was already becoming known as the father of bluegrass music, and his band was the place where new musicians could really shine. For Stringbean, joining Monroe's group was both an honor and a chance to learn from some of the best musicians around. After he left Monroe's group, Stringbean started working with other performers. One of the most important friendships of his life was with Grandpa Jones. Jones was another banjo player and funny entertainer who loved the same kind of old-time music and humor that Stringbean did. The two became close friends and work partners, performing together in shows that mixed songs with light-hearted comedy. Their friendship on stage made audiences love them, and they became well known in the world of country entertainment. The real big moment in Stringbean's career came when he started performing at the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. The Opry was the heart of country music, and getting to appear there meant you had really made it. For Stringbean, the Opry was more than just a place to play music. It was where he developed the stage personality that made him beloved all across the country. On the Opry stage, Stringbean combined his banjo playing with his comedy acts, creating a performance style that was completely his own. He also came up with a special look that audiences never forgot. He wore really big shirts, baggy pants held up with suspenders, and old-fashioned hats. The outfit made him look a little silly, but that was exactly what he wanted. It made people laugh before he even said a word. Combined with his music and humor, the costume helped create the image of Stringbean as the humble, funny banjo man who never took himself too seriously. And soon, Stringbean's life would change again when he met the woman who would stay by his side for the rest of his days. In 1945, just as World War II was ending and the country was starting to get back to peaceful life, David Stringbean Ackman married Estelle Stanfill. Their marriage became the steady center of his life, giving him the feeling of home and comfort he had always valued. Estelle was known by everyone who met her as quiet, kind, and really supportive. She didn't want to be famous and liked to stay in the background, but she was always proud of Stringbean and stood by him at every step of his career. The couple's relationship was often described as one of quiet love. They didn't have any children, but that never seemed to make their bond any weaker. Friends and fellow musicians noticed how much they cared for each other. Stringbean was the one making crowds laugh and filling stages with music, but when he wasn't performing, it was Estelle who gave him stability and peace. They weren't loud about their love, but everyone could see it in the way they lived together. Not long after they got married, Stringbean and Estelle moved into a home that perfectly matched who they were. They chose to live in a small log cabin in Ridgetop, Tennessee. While many of Stringbean's fellow performers used their fame and money to buy bigger houses, expensive cars, or other fancy things, the Ackmans chose a different path. Their cabin was simple, rustic, and cozy. It had a wood stove for heat, a garden that Estelle took care of carefully, and chickens that gave them eggs. Most of their meals were made from scratch, often with ingredients they had grown or raised themselves. This kind of life might have surprised some fans who saw Stringbean on stage each week at the Grand Ole Opry or on the popular TV show Hee Haw. To people who didn't know them, it might have seemed weird that a nationally known performer lived in such a simple way. But to Stringbean and Estelle, it was the only way that felt right. They didn't need flashy things to feel successful. Their happiness came from simple living, gardening, fishing, hunting, and enjoying quiet time together when the music and laughter of the stage were done. One reason they lived so simply was Stringbean's deep distrust of banks. This distrust went all the way back to when he was a boy during the Great Depression. As a young man, he had seen families lose all their savings overnight when banks closed their doors. He never forgot the fear and helplessness that spread during those years, and it shaped the way he handled money for the rest of his life. Even after he found success and steady pay from music, he refused to keep his money in banks. Instead, Stringbean chose to keep his earnings close to him. He carried cash with him, and at home, he found weird hiding places to stash bills. Some say he tucked money inside the chimney. Others believed it was hidden under the floorboards or behind loose bricks in the walls. It was never certain how much he had hidden, but stories spread quickly in town. Rumors began to grow that Stringbean might be keeping thousands of dollars tucked away inside that little cabin. But while their home life looked peaceful on the outside, their habits, especially the hidden cash, would one day attract dangerous attention. And before long, that attention would come from the worst kind of people. For most people who knew David Stringbean Ackman, November 10, 1973, started just like any other Saturday. Stringbean had a routine he almost never changed, and this night was no different. He and Estelle got ready for their weekly trip to Nashville, where he was supposed to perform at the Grand Ole Opry. At the Opry that evening, Stringbean was in a good mood. He played his banjo, told his jokes, and entertained the crowd just like he always did. Fellow musicians later remembered that nothing about the night seemed unusual. Estelle, as always, was there with him. She was a quiet presence backstage, talking politely with others, but keeping her attention on her husband. For Stringbean, having her by his side was simply part of the life they shared. When the Opry ended, Stringbean did what he always did. He and Estelle left the show and headed back home to their cabin in Ridgetop, Tennessee. The drive was normal, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. To everyone else it was just another Saturday night. But while Stringbean was playing music and making audiences laugh, trouble was already waiting at his home. Two cousins, John and Marvin Brown, both with histories of stealing and small crimes, had broken into the Ackman cabin earlier that evening. They had grown up poor and restless, often in trouble with the police, and in recent months they had become more reckless. The Browns had heard the same rumors that had been going around for years, that Stringbean didn't trust banks and kept large amounts of cash hidden in his house. Stories spread through town that thousands of dollars might be tucked away in his chimney, under his floors, or behind the walls. To the Browns, these rumors sounded like opportunity. On that November night, they forced their way into the cabin and waited. Their plan was simple: surprise Stringbean when he came home, scare him, and take whatever money they could find. They were convinced there was a hidden treasure inside the modest little home. When Stringbean and Estelle got home after the Opry, it was late, close to midnight. They parked the car and walked toward the cabin, not knowing about the danger. Inside, Stringbean went in first. Almost right away, he was confronted by the Browns. Reports say that John Brown fired the first shot, hitting Stringbean near the doorway. He fell down and died almost instantly. Estelle, terrified, ran back, out of the cabin and toward the car, hoping to escape or find help. But she didn't make it far. Marvin Brown chased her down and shot her outside near the vehicle. In only a matter of minutes, the couple's quiet life was ended in a burst of violence. The Browns searched the cabin, desperate to find the fortune they believed was hidden there. But what they found was far less than they expected. Despite their belief that thousands of dollars were stashed away, only a small amount of cash was discovered. The rest of the rumored treasure was nowhere to be seen. The next morning, Stringbean's close friend and fellow Opry star, Grandpa Jones, arrived at the cabin. The two had made plans to go hunting together, something they often did. Jones pulled up to the home, expecting to find Stringbean ready with his gear. Instead, he was met with a sight that haunted him for the rest of his life. Near the car, Jones saw Estelle's body. In shock, he hurried toward the house and discovered Stringbean lying inside just beyond the doorway. Realizing what had happened, he immediately left to get help. Later, he would describe the moment as one of the most painful memories he ever carried. Though he lived for many years after, Grandpa Jones could never forget finding his dear friends in such a tragic state. News of the murder spread quickly, sending shockwaves through Nashville and the wider country music world. Fans, fellow performers, and neighbors alike were stunned. The idea that this humble, kind-hearted couple could be taken in such a brutal way felt impossible to accept, and soon the search for justice would begin, uncovering details that shocked both fans and friends. The shocking murders of Stringbean and Estelle Ackman left the Nashville community reeling. Friends and fans mourned while neighbors whispered about who could have done such a cruel thing. It didn't take long for suspicion to begin circling, and the trail eventually pointed toward two cousins already known to police, John and Marvin Brown. In the days following the murders, the little town of Ridgetop was buzzing with talk. Everyone knew about the long-standing rumors of Stringbean's hidden money, and many guessed right away that robbery had been the reason for the crime. But it was the sudden behavior of John and Marvin Brown that first drew real attention. Both men had criminal records, mostly for stealing, and their reputations made people suspicious. But what stood out most was their spending. Just after the murders, locals noticed that the Browns suddenly seemed to have more cash than usual. They were buying things they normally couldn't afford, showing off money and talking too freely. In a small town where everyone noticed small changes, this stood out immediately. Some who knew them quietly told the police about their concerns. It was the kind of loose talk and showy behavior that made investigators believe the cousins might, indeed, be connected to the crime. Police began watching the Browns closely. They collected statements from locals who had noticed the sudden change in their habits. Some reported hearing the men talk about Stringbean or about money in ways that didn't feel right. Others pointed out how nervous they seemed when the subject of the murders came up. Investigators also searched for physical evidence. While much of the crime scene had already told the story of what happened inside the cabin, the key was connecting it directly to the Browns. Over time, police gathered enough details to build a strong case. A few stolen items that came from the Ackman home were found with the Browns. Combined with the suspicious timeline of their movements and the unusual spending spree, the case against them grew stronger every day. It wasn't long before the police felt confident they had their men. Both cousins were arrested within weeks of the murders, bringing a small sense of relief to a community still shaken by the violent deaths of two beloved neighbors. The arrests were only the beginning. The trial that followed attracted enormous attention, not just from the local community, but from the entire country music world. Fans wanted justice for Stringbean and Estelle, and the courtroom became the stage for that process. Testimonies came from several directions. Grandpa Jones, who had been the one to discover the bodies, gave emotional statements about the morning he walked into the scene. Fellow musicians from the Opry also spoke about Stringbean's character and routine, helping to establish the timeline of his final hours. Investigators laid out the evidence they had gathered, from the Browns' suspicious spending to their possession of stolen items. In the end, the court handed down heavy sentences. John Brown, the shooter, got 198 years in prison, a sentence designed to make sure he would never walk free again. Marvin Brown got a lighter sentence, but still long enough to keep him behind bars for the rest of his life. He later died in prison, never seeing release. And even with the killers locked away, one mystery still haunted everyone. Whatever became of Stringbean's hidden money? When David Stringbean Ackman and his wife Estelle were murdered in 1973, the crime itself shocked Nashville and the country music world. But in the days and years that followed, another part of the story began to surface. A mystery about money hidden away in the Ackman cabin. It turned out that the rumors people had whispered about for years contained a surprising amount of truth. When investigators went through the Ackman cabin after the murders, They found money stashed in unusual places. Small bundles of bills were hidden in a pair of boots, tucked into the chimney, and sealed behind parts of the cabin's walls. By the time everything was counted, the hidden cash added up to around $20,000, a lot of money in the early 1970s, especially for someone who lived so simply. For those who knew Stringbean, this discovery was not a complete shock. He had lived through the Great Depression, a time when banks failed, and many families lost everything. That experience left him with a lifelong distrust of financial institutions. He preferred to keep his earnings close by where he could see and touch them. To him, hiding money in his home felt safer than trusting it to anyone else. Still, the exact amount surprised people. Stringbean had been careful with money all his life. And while he made a good living through music and television, nobody expected him to be sitting on thousands of dollars in secret. Once the first stash of money was found, speculation took off. Neighbors and fans alike began to wonder just how much more Stringbean might have hidden. Some people claimed he had tucked away tens of thousands of dollars more. Others insisted the cabin was practically a vault filled with secret compartments waiting to be uncovered. These rumors quickly turned the Ackman home into an object of curiosity. Long after the murders, stories circulated about intruders and treasure hunters sneaking onto the property at night, hoping to find another hidden bundle. While authorities secured the cabin after the crime, interest in the so-called fortune never really faded. The tale of hidden wealth became a part of Stringbean's legend, just as memorable as his music and comedy. People told the story of a man who distrusted banks so much that he scattered money around his cabin, creating a mystery that lasted for decades. Then, more than 20 years later, the rumors proved true once again. In 1996, when the cabin was being renovated, workers uncovered another hidden stash. Behind a wall sealed away for decades, they found around $20,000 more in cash. By then, however, the bills were worthless. Time and damp conditions had ruined them. The paper was decayed, and the currency could not be exchanged. What had once been a small fortune had become nothing more than a curiosity, physical proof of Stringbean's habits, but no longer of any monetary value. This second discovery only fueled more speculation. If money had been hidden so deeply in the walls, how much else might still be buried in the cabin or surrounding property? While no further finds have ever been reported, the idea of undiscovered stashes has never fully gone away. The mystery of Stringbean's hidden fortune was matched by another struggle, the question of who would inherit what he left behind. Stringbean and Estelle had no children, and after their deaths, no will was found. That left the estate to be sorted out in court. The legal battles dragged on as relatives from both sides made claims. Eventually, most of the property and belongings were awarded to Estelle's family, but the disputes caused tension, and the hidden money discoveries only complicated matters. Each new find raised questions about who had the right to it and who would ultimately benefit. In the end, much of Stringbean's estate was divided through the courts, but the questions about his hidden wealth left a shadow over the process. His choice to hide money rather than trust it to banks had not only shaped his daily life, but also left a legacy of mystery and conflict after his death. And even as the fortune mystery lingered, fans continued to remember what truly made Stringbean special: the music and laughter he brought to the world. Even decades after the murders of Stringbean and Estelle Ackman, the story did not rest quietly. New developments, surprising decisions, and lingering questions kept the tragedy alive in the public conversation. One of the most shocking moments came in 2014 when one of the killers, John Brown, was released from prison. When John Brown was convicted in the 1970s, the sentence was meant to ensure he would never walk free again. He had received 198 years in prison, a term that left no doubt about the seriousness of his crime. To many people, that sentence brought a small measure of comfort. It meant the man responsible for pulling the trigger would spend the rest of his life behind bars. But in 2014, more than 40 years after the murders, news broke that John Brown had been granted parole. He was 64 years old at the time, and parole officials argued that he no longer posed a threat to society. The decision sparked outrage. Country music fans, friends of Stringbean, and members of Estelle's family all voiced their disappointment. For them, the brutality of the crime was something that could never be repaid with time served. Many believed Brown's release was an insult to the memory of the couple and to the community that had never fully healed from the loss. Making matters worse, Brown's own words after his release did little to soften feelings. He gave conflicting statements and interviews, sometimes claiming regret, other times sounding detached and unapologetic. Many felt he lacked real remorse for what he had done, which only deepened the anger toward the parole decision. The release of John Brown also brought old questions back into focus, questions that had never been fully answered. One of the biggest mysteries was whether John and Marvin Brown had acted alone. Some locals long suspected that a third accomplice might have been involved. The theory was that someone else had either been at the cabin that night or had helped plan the crime. Nothing was ever proven, but the suspicion lingered. Another unanswered question was how the Browns knew Stringbean's schedule so well. His routine was steady: perform at the Opry on Saturday nights, then head home. But did the Browns simply take advantage of a well-known habit, or had someone tipped them off? Some speculated that an insider from the Opry or a neighbor might have provided information, though no evidence ever surfaced to support that theory. Over time, the unanswered questions gave rise to countless theories and rumors. Some believed the Browns had inside knowledge from someone close to Stringbean, while others were sure they had acted alone, but simply guessed his schedule correctly. As for the hidden fortune, the rumors only grew after the 1996 discovery of another $20,000 in the cabin walls. If money was still being uncovered more than 2 decades later, who was to say there wasn't more? This fueled speculation that either the Browns had stolen a larger amount than anyone realized, or that more hidden cash might still be waiting somewhere, undiscovered. To this day, these questions have no clear answers. Theories continue to circulate among fans, historians, and locals who remember the events. For many, the mystery is part of what keeps the story alive, even as the tragedy itself remains painful to recall.